Hello, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. I'm Sandra Martinez-Heranen, Administrative Assistant with the HERC Central Office. I want to take a moment to review some quick housekeeping details. You are all in listen-only mode, but we hope you will actively engage in the conversation. You have the opportunity to send your questions through the GoToWebinar question box. On your screen, you will see a GoToWebinar control panel. In the control panel, you'll find the question box. Throughout the webinar, if you have a question, you can enter it at any time. We will address the questions during our designated Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and we encourage you to participate. For those seeking HRCI or SHRM recertification credits, you must stay on the webinar for the entire duration to receive your credits. An email will be sent to you after the webinar regarding how to obtain those credits. Also, if you're having any trouble with your technology or ability to hear the presenters, please enter that information into the chat box. In the unlikely event the webinar ends prematurely, please just call back in again in a couple of minutes. I will be monitoring the question box and do my best to assist you. We will also have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. I would now like to introduce Nancy Abersold, Founder and Executive Director of HERC. Nancy?
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you everyone for joining us on today's webinar. And a huge thanks to our speakers and our co-hosting organizations, the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities and the Association of Public Land Grant Universities. I'd like to say a few words about what HERC is. For those of you who might be new to HERC, I'd like to familiarize you with our organization and also why webinars like this one today are so important. So HERC is advanced a little too fast there. HERC is a member-governed nonprofit organization, and we have 720 member institutions, most colleges and universities. We have 18 chapters around the country, and this is a big part of what we do. We're the only organization that connects exceptional professionals with institutions that are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we also assist dual career couples. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we all have in common as higher ed and associated employers. We all share the goal to meet the academic mission to provide excellence in teaching, research, and service, and to advance knowledge in areas of importance to the nation and the world. And to meet this goal, we need the most talented and diverse workforce. But we have challenges that get in our way, and some of the common challenges that I think we can all agree that we face is that when we get homogeneous applicant pools, we have a homogeneous workforce. Sometimes we face the inability to identify job opportunities for dual career spouses and partners when we seek to hire new professionals and faculty at our institutions. Our search committees and employees sometimes have conscious or unconscious biases that need to be challenged. And then we all are trying to work on these issues with limited resources. So HERC works in 4 strategic areas to help address some of these challenges. The first is through diversity recruiting and OFCCP compliance. And we do that through advertising and attendance at professional conferences that many of our members wouldn't have the budget or the bandwidth to participate in to help increase the diversity of the pools that are applying for positions at our institutions. We also provide dual career resources to our institutions and to those seeking employment in higher education through a robust regional network of colleagues that we can turn to when we have dual career needs, and also job search tools to help dual career couples find jobs within a commutable distance on our website. And then professional development. like the webinar today. This is a very important thing that HERC does to help disseminate information to our members so that they can do better on their campuses. And then through cost savings, through our joint job board, and also through negotiated member discounts and partnerships. Okay, well, enough about HERC for now. I'd like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Jennifer Danek, who is the Senior Director for the Urban Universities for Health Project with the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities and the Association of Public Land Grant Universities. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Nancy. We appreciate having HERC as a co-sponsor for today's webinar. I can advance the slides. Julia, would you be able to advance the slides?
Try clicking on it first.
There we go. Okay, thank you so much. It's still not working. Perhaps you can take control over the slides and not just indicate to advance. Okay, this webinar is the third in a series that will run through June, focusing this one on diverse faculty hiring. And the purpose of the series overall is to disseminate and engage around the findings from our most recent report on diversity in the biomedical research workforce. This report is available in the handout section of your control panel, and you can also download the report or find out more about the webinar series on our website, uuhealth.org. The report that we're discussing today was developed by APLU and USU with the Association of American Medical Colleges, which has been a great partner with us for several years. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the National Institutes of Health, which provided support for this work, which was done over the past year. The report was developed through a collaborative effort engaging 70 experts identified by presidents and research leaders across 28 universities and academic medical centers. The purpose was to examine the existing evidence for diversity efforts in a number of areas, and to identify specifically gaps in the evidence and actions that we could take collectively that would improve evidence for university leaders and have a national impact. The work focused on 4 areas, one of which we'll discuss today, diverse faculty hiring and advancement. The other areas are leadership, organizational change and climate, diverse student success, and recruitment and admissions. Next. So a key finding from the report is that evidence-based hiring strategies exist, but the extent to which institutions are using these practices is still largely unknown. Leaders also lack information about how to implement these practices across a variety of institutional contexts. So, for example, one practice that you'll hear about today is requesting that faculty candidates submit a diversity statement during the hiring process. There's evidence from several institutions that this is effective in terms of improving diversity outcomes and the quality and numbers of the applicant pool. But institutions still need consistent and clear implementation guidelines in order to be able to adapt the practice. So you'll hear more from Dr. Haynes on how they're doing this at University of California, Irvine. So these are important issues if our aim is to spread effective practices as well as within an institution to scale these practices so that they have maximum impact. Next. I'd like to highlight 2 research actions that were recommended in the report and were identified as a priority by our presidents and research leaders. The first is a national study on faculty hiring practices to understand the extent of use of evidence-based practices, as well as where university and academic medical centers need further assistance. And the second is a pilot of applicant diversity statements to determine the effectiveness in a variety of institutional contexts and also best practices for implementation. There's a number of other research options that have been recommended with regards to hiring and advancement of diverse faculty, and so I encourage you to learn more in the report. And with that, I will turn it over to Chi Mei, who is the Director for Biomedical Engineering Research Program at the University of Houston, and we'll talk more about some of what we do know with regards to the evidence of diverse faculty hiring and advancement.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate it. And so thank you, everybody, for joining us for this webinar. I am Chi Mei from the University of Houston. So I wanted to just quickly thank Jennifer and Julia Michaels for including me in this study and in this work. So I especially wanted to thank Julia for organizing everything. She's the project manager for the USU APLU Office of Urban Initiatives and has kind of pulled together a lot of this. So with that, I was part of one of the work groups that looked at this, and so in terms of looking at the issues of diverse faculty hiring and advancement, the real question is, what are, as Jennifer has mentioned, what's the evidence that's out there for the strategies that are being implemented by some people, and how has that impacted diverse pools of candidates and mitigating things such as bias during the hiring process. And you know, one of the things that I think is a challenging thing to look at is how do you then support the advancement of underrepresented faculty. I think, am I able to control this? Let me see. I don't think. Julie, thank you. All right. So the first one is the slide is why diversity, and I think many of us on this call can appreciate the impact of diversity specifically on our students, how it enriches the teaching and learning environment, especially for those of us that were minorities going through different programs. Seeing a diverse faculty makes a difference in how you go through the program, and many times your success in the program. I know personally having a diverse faculty reach out to me helped me get into undergraduate research early in my career. So I think the impact on our students is something that sometimes can be underappreciated. But it really not only makes an impact in attracting students to the biomedical field, but also enabling them to get through the programs. If we look at our numbers in fields nationally, the numbers are in terms of, let's see, the numbers of PhD students that come out of certain populations are very, very low. So obviously having that diverse faculty will help encourage students also and help them when they do get in trouble to kind of continue through the program. Another thing is the evidence in terms of why diversity is important is just a higher quality of research outcomes, and you know, and part of this could be tied to the different voices that come to the table, the different experiences that they're bringing to that, and then just even the general feeling of the free exchange of ideas. So there's been evidence that higher quality research comes out of having diversity in various environments, and then aids in the retention of minority faculty. I think this is a huge thing. At the University of Houston, we've been pretty fortunate to receive an advanced grant, and just even compiling the numbers in terms of what's the diversity in our community, especially among women and women of color, it's amazingly sad. So that has been one of the things that we've found in terms of when you have a faculty that's one of the only of their kind, you know, the impact on that faculty is something that I think has been difficult to assess. So that's some of the reasons for why diversity. Next slide, please. I think, okay. So in terms of the other impacts of diversity, when you look at the health and biomedical sciences in particular, there are certain health disparities that exist, both in terms of clinical trials. Who are you involving? Okay, I'll try to speak up. I just got a notice on that. So part of the things in terms of clinical trials, who are you involving, and kind of how is it impacting certain communities in terms of the health outcomes that are coming out, the research that's being done. It's also known to impact, have a higher outcomes for journal impacts, having higher impact factors on research and things that are authored by diverse faculty. When we think about the biomedical sciences in particular, when we're serving certain communities, having individuals that are doing research in those communities that are diverse makes a difference in the types of questions we ask and in terms of the types of assumptions we make in our science. So there's evidence of that as well. and also even interfacing with those communities makes a difference in terms of the organization of the research and the individuals that are involved. Okay, so let's go to existing evidence. Part of the study was, again, as has been mentioned, to examine the existing evidence. And so there, just to briefly talk about the process, so the group went through multiple things, including reviewing literature, action group discussions, and having key interviews with various specialists in the area. So one of the things, I was involved in the action group discussions, and just to kind of talk about how the action group members, they were actually nominated by their respective university leaders, the presidents and chancellors and things like that, that were members of the USU APLU community. And so upon nomination, we had an initial meeting in Cleveland, and then from there we divided up into our action groups, and then we met periodically over I think it was about a period of 6 months to a year, and then we looked at the evidence. We had discussions within the action groups, and then out of that we came up with the summary reports. Part of what we did was we examined the evidence in specific areas once we decided how to divide up those areas, and then we also identified gaps where further evidence was needed, and then we made recommendations. As part of that recommendation, we actually made those recommendations to the leadership of the universities, and we had the opportunity to meet in small groups with them in a round-robin style. And so that was quite informative, because we were able to provide them with the evidence and kind of some of the recommendations, and then they voted on it and decided what was the top most important recommendation. So some of the evidence that was there was, expanding recruitment networks. There were evidence around that, and also diversity and unconscious bias training, how effective that was for search committees. And one of the things that there was evidence about is how to include diversity advocates on committees when you are, in order to ensure that there's consistency and best practices being used in those recruiting committees. And so I just wanted to briefly mention, when we think about diversity advocates on interview committees, and sometimes I think people might underestimate the importance of that when you are an underrepresented minority in, going for an interview, and you see a face that might look a little bit like you. For some people, that might make an impact, and so, but again, I assume those are kind of difficult to measure. Next slide, please. Maybe I can control this. Okay, did I do it? Okay, thank you. Another impact in terms of existing evidence is the fact that requiring a diverse pool of candidates also has an impact on the outcome, and understandably that's a challenge, and I think that's been one of the things that some universities tend to struggle with. Where do we find these diversity candidates? And I think that really points to the fact that there has to be a little bit more proactive things that are done to actually diversify the pool on the front end, so that at the end you'll have a higher probability of seeing a diverse pool of candidates. The other thing is using objective evaluation rubrics, having more structured interviews so that the interview questions are more consistent versus faculty members kind of going off script, and having standardized interview questions so that we can more readily standardize the evaluation. And also, there's certain things, the advanced practices for gender diversity, again, coming out of the large investment NSF has made at looking at particularly women in the STEM and SBS fields. And there's a rich amount of data there that can help. And there's been a lot of practices that have come out of these programs as to what works to both recruit and retain diverse faculty. And so next slide, please, promising practices. So some highlights on things that have seemed to help with recruitment and retainment is inviting applicants, as has been mentioned, inviting the applicants to submit their diversity statement describing past contributions. And I think part of that, and again, just speaking from my own experience, even though I didn't experience that, but it signals to that faculty or that candidate that the university is serious about this. when they have to do this, as serious as they are about some of the other factors that go into, academic applications. Faculty cluster hiring is another promising practice, and this was interesting because within the committee we actually discussed this, where for some universities it worked and some universities it might not have had the outcome of diversifying the faculty. So I think this is one of those cases in terms of putting the evidence into context in how it was used, and also including the diversity language and other signals in the job description. I think that's also an impact. I know our university recently put together a diversity statement on the university website, and initially sometimes we think these things might not make as much of a difference, but for myself, when I went and read it, it really does say something to you that the university is able to even talk about that or acknowledge that, and it does send signals in terms of when faculty are looking for positions. And I would just like to briefly say, especially when a faculty is the associate level as well. And so the last one, examples and resources. There we go. Okay. So, of course, the report has many additional information, but there's specific examples of universities that have implemented things that have been effective, including the candidate diversity statements, which we're going to hear more about, and the workshops for faculty search committees, unconscious bias training. I know our university has also started looking at that. And then this concept of the Rooney Rule, where you're in a way to try to diversify the pools. So those are some examples, and as a faculty candidate, I think even as universities begin to implement this, having existing faculty members that are from underrepresented groups being part of the discussion of how they would have perceived knowing that some of these things exist, I think would be useful, because sometimes things like, we don't want to put things in place that now negates the quality of the applicants that are coming in, where it's perceived that, we had this special treatment for these faculty. So I think that's something that we didn't really discuss, but that might be something that universities consider as they go forth, but just having those voices of the existing underrepresented minorities in the room when they implement these things. Okay, thank you. I think I probably went over, and so I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Douglas Haynes from the University of UC Irvine.
We're having a little issue with Douglas. Just give us a second to try to get this organized. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Douglas, if you're there.
Douglas, please unmute your line if your line is muted so that we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to echo Dr. May's thanks to HERC, APLU, and the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities. My presentation will focus on UCI's experience with adopting and implementing a diversity statement requirement for all applicants for our faculty positions. We began this process in 2013-2014 after learning about UC San Diego's experience. They piloted this in their Division of Physical Sciences. And we, in turn, in 2014-2015, piloted across the entire campus for both STEM and non-STEM academic schools. And in 2015-2016, we mandated it. That is to say, all searches had to include language and require a diversity statement of all applicants. This applied to junior searches as well as senior searches, and also dean level searches. Next slide, please. it's important to sort of see the diversity statement requirement as part of a comprehensive set of tools in our toolkit to enable the search process. And so it's for UCI, we set the expectation that we want to hire to national availability. That's our aspirational goal. Second, at the department level, we have dedicated equity advisors who are faculty who give mandatory search presentations where they share best practices, review hiring activity in the recent past, and they also have the authority to monitor the searches at key milestones before the start and also at the point of the proposed shortlist. The diversity statement is incorporated into this monitoring process, and it's supplemented by targeted outreach to professional associations, affinity groups to raise awareness about our various searches across the campus. And we also link the diversity statement to a new Inclusive Excellence Supplement FTE program, whereby a department that forwards 2 unranked finalists who have particular exemplary diversity statements, that department may receive 50% funding for a second full-time faculty position. Next. The purpose of the diversity statement, and this echoes Dr. May's comments earlier, but it bears repeating. First, it emphatically underscores the campus role as a land-grant university serving residents of the state of California. And that's a very, I think, compelling rationale. It explains why we do what we do. Second, it also aligns with our academic personnel policy that has specific language to encourage and recognize faculty contribution to diversity. It reinforces our campus strategic goal of increasing faculty participation in activities in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it also communicates inclusive excellence as a faculty expectation for all applicants as they come into and join the professoriate. And finally, it adds additional information for the search committee. Search committees in practice receive a search statement, usually it's contained in the cover letter. Some institutions augment that with a teaching statement, and we felt that the diversity statement provides yet another sort of space for the candidate to describe their interests as well as their skills and competencies as it relates to advancing inclusive excellence at UCI. Next slide, please. I think implementation is extremely important in this case because, in effect, with the diversity statement, it becomes a formal part of the search process. And so that involved interaction with the deans, as well as chairs, and several communications to the faculty. And I just want to stress that. But the implement process consisted of adopting mandatory language that appears in all of our ads that is explicit in requiring applicants to submit the diversity statement. So no application is considered complete without the diversity statement. We also have an online application applicant system that has a dedicated field for applicants to upload their diversity statements. It might seem like a minor issue, but it's particularly important because you can't have an expectation and then have a mechanical roadblock for people to fulfill it. Third, all search committees and departments are expected and required to discuss the strength of the diversity statement as part of the rationale for a proposed short list of candidates. And this is particularly important. This particular feature of implementation is designed to accustom the faculty to discuss diversity. to engage with it in the myriad ways in which candidates describe their previous or proposed future activities. And finally, there's a level of accountability where each dean is expected to consider the diversity statements of all finalists for faculty positions. And furthermore, they are supposed to summarize their diversity activities and new hires as part of their annual report to the provost. Again, the goal is to reinforce the expectation, acclimate people to discussing it, so that over time, our expectations of what diversity activities really represent are substantive. The next slide describes the evaluation grid that search committees are expected and required to use in order to assess the statements by applicants. This is important because what it does is it sets a fairly basic foundation for evaluating candidates. The maximum number of points available is 5. It ranges from as basic as a diversity statement that's included. The other components really reflect the level of engagement with the diversity that's described in the diversity statement. And meanwhile, specificity in plans to contribute to our campus efforts. And that requires applicants to become more familiar with the suite of programs and activities that the campus has. The 3 bullet points below the grid describes the purpose of the diversity statement, and it echoes my previous slide. Next slide, please. I want to show you some data that is aligned with the implementation of the diversity statement beginning in 2014-2015. And we sort of see some significant improvement in the hiring activity of the campus when it comes to underrepresented minorities. I think that the relationship between hiring activity year over year is more correlated rather than causal with the diversity statement. But what I think it has done is raise awareness about why it matters. It created expectations, certainly among our new faculty. And I think furthermore, it sent a fairly compelling signal, particularly to underrepresented minority faculty across all sectors of the campus, as well as women in our STEM fields where they're underrepresented, that this is an institution-wide commitment, and that any faculty member can do their part. This is particularly important because we want to sort of get away from underrepresented minority faculty either implicitly or explicitly being expected to burden the total responsibility for leading and contributing to diversity for their academic unit and by extension the campus. I want to move on to the next slide that describes that the diversity statement is not just an isolated tool, it's actually integrated in the campus strategic plan entitled Bright Path, Brilliant Future that was released in December 2016. And the campus has established a goal that by 2020-2021, 50% of the faculty will be engaged in inclusive excellence activities. Right now, based on a sweep of information, about 35% of faculty as of 2015-2016 were engaged in inclusive excellence activities. Again, this underscores the fact that as a land-grant institution, the faculty are engaged with inclusive excellence, that it's taken seriously, that it's an expectation of our new faculty, but it's also a continuing expectation of the faculty. And in fact, we have language in the review process that describes for faculty how to represent their diversity activities. And so the goal is to create more engagement around inclusive excellence, particularly among our faculty, who number 1,200 at this time. And I want to move on to the final slide. We have this, I think, robust web page that is a searchable online database for diversity opportunities. And the goal is to both invite academic units and other units to submit diversity activities in this database, and at the same time encourage faculty to consult it in order to identify and engage in activities that they're particularly interested in. One of the great features about this searchable database is that you can search by keyword, and it will call up all programming within the database that relates, for example, to diversity, the LGBT community, mentoring, outreach. So at this point, the campus is, I think, encouraged by the diversity statement requirement. It aligns with our role as a land-grant institution. It's designed to sort of elevate faculty engagement in these important commitments of the institution. And furthermore, it's a way to sort of diversify not only our faculty, but our graduate students and undergraduates who we hope will be future faculty. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Valentine.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm delighted to be participating in this very important activity, and I'd like to congratulate the organizers for putting it all together. I'd like to commence my remarks by emphasizing the NIH approach and recent approaches to enhancing diversity in the scientific workforce. We take it very seriously to mean that we need to be doing this work with data-driven approaches, using the scientific method in as rigorous as possible as we do the rest of our science. And in light of this, NIH has articulated 4 cross-cutting challenges, which we feel that if we were to be successful in addressing, we would really see enhancement in the diversity in the scientific workforce. The first of those is the science of diversity, getting that evidence base that informs us of the way that diversity amongst the scientific workforce, scientists themselves, actually results in the enhancement of the quality of the research and the outputs of the research. And while we have a lot of evidence from other sectors, we would like to see more evidence in this direction as it pertains to research in the biomedical space. And we are committed to getting that evidence in the very near future. The second area is directly relevant to some of the work that the speakers have already alluded to, and that is doing this work of diversity such that we can ultimately know what works, for whom, and in what context. And when we look back at all of the programs that NIH has supported, we feel confident that it has been effective in enhancing the diversity in the trainee workforce. But the programs were not designed in ways to be able to teach us what is working and how we can make things better. And as a consequence of that, you will see that NIH has put out and invested in a whole new set of training programs called the Diversity Consortium Program, which is essentially embarking on 10 different experiments that will address what works for whom and in what context. The third cross-cutting challenge we think is very important that hitherto has not been well addressed is to do with the social, cultural, and psychological factors and barriers that get in the way of enhancing diversity in our scientific workforce. And paramount to that is implicit bias. And you've heard some mention about that. And I think that if we were to really address that through educational platforms, and I will underscore educational platforms as opposed to training, then we will be able to addressing a lot of the barriers. And then finally, we need to have strategies for sustaining and disseminating this new knowledge of how we are to do this in the most effective way. So let me just get down to more specifics. I was asked to talk about what are the specifics that we are developing here within this office to be able, that can be ready to roll out for other institutions to enhance the diversity in their scientific workforce. Well, in order to do this properly, when I got on board here, I needed to understand where it is that we need to focus. Where can we actually make that major difference at this point in time in diversifying the faculty? And it has become very evident to us that while most of our work and investment has been in the training part of the biomedical research workforce, we have actually been investing less in that transition. And there is further data that helps us. I don't know whether all of you have seen recent work published by Kenny Gibbs that indicates that now, each year, recipients of PhDs in biomedical disciplines, there's actually 10% of the pool is from underrepresented groups. That means about 1,700 students getting their PhDs in biomedical disciplines are from the classic underrepresented racial ethnic groups. And more than that, we already know that for women, when we're thinking about gender diversity, women have made up greater than 50% of recipients of biomedical PhDs for greater than 50 years. And I say all that to emphasize that we already have a highly talented pool with whom to work with and get them into these careers. So how do we do that? You will often heard the myth perpetuated that there simply aren't enough, or we are all fighting for a very few and a very small pool. And what the evidence shows is that, in fact, that isn't correct. We now make up 10% underrepresented getting their PhDs, and yet the hiring into the faculty positions is about 1.6%. We could rapidly bridge that gap within 4 to 5 years if we were to simply recruit and retain 100 of those PhDs that are highly qualified to be recruited and retained. But what are the tools to get us there? So my office has developed 3 specific tools that can be taken up by any institution immediately. The first is search processes, search tools that can help us identify highly qualified candidates for positions and as assistant professors, associate professors, tenured professors, and leadership positions very rapidly. And we can describe how we do those searches. And right now, for positions within the intramural program here at NIH, those tools are working extremely well, to the extent that very often the search committee doesn't even think about or know about a candidate that is from a diverse background until we provide them with that those people for them to then conduct outreach. So that's one set of tools. The second set of tools is to enhance our outreach efforts. And what that means is by simply sitting there in your institution and assuming that everybody wants to come and work in your institution is not enough. You need to go out and set up those relationships ahead of time in order to be successful at recruiting anybody, all faculty. And what we've been piloting here is a program that we call Future Research Leaders. What we do is bring 30 or so postdoctoral and junior faculty members to the campus for a 3-day visit where we hear about their research, they hear about NIH opportunities, but most importantly, they get to meet 3 or 4 leaders in the institution to explain to them how it works and to get them become knowledgeable about the culture within the NIH intramural program. Any institution out there can take up that template and begin to do that, and within a short period of time, you can have a pool of candidates to whom you can go out to. And for that matter, groups of institutions can get together and form a consortium and do this kind of work together. And that way we'll be able to identify that talent pool and actively recruit them. The final tool that we have developed here, which is working extremely well, is a platform for educating on this issue of implicit attitudes and helping people make better decisions, because we know that implicit attitudes get in the way of us actually making decisions based on data. And it takes the form of a talk to search committees, to departments, and it's buttressed by pre and post implicit attitude testing so that people get a sense directly of a measure of their degree of implicit bias, and they get tools to correct it. And again, these platforms, these tools, we have developed in my office here. They're ready to roll out and ready to go. So I am very excited and hopeful that we now have not only strategies that we have described and have been described by many people, but we now have tools to enable people to enhance the diversity in the recruitment of faculty. And I really do think we can become the role models for recruiting scientists and researchers, not only to academic positions, but in fact to all of those careers that are essential for supporting biomedical research in the future. And I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to our moderator. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, well, we're starting to get questions now. Thank you so much, Dr. Valentine. Those are exciting efforts that are happening at NIH internally, and also exciting in the sense that they're tools that are available for other universities to use as well. So I will begin with a question from the audience that has come for Dr. Haynes. Does UC Irvine have a mandated diversity statement as part of the promotion and tenure process, as well as guidelines for that, or is this just for the hiring process?
Thank you for that question. The short answer is no. We do not mandate that faculty, as part of their promotion report, specify their contributions to diversity. What we do is that we strongly recommend it, and it is threaded throughout the sort of reporting templates. Furthermore, each year, the provost sends a communication to the entire faculty describing guidelines for reporting on contributions to diversity. And I think that's important in part because it allows people who engage in these activities to report on them in a way that ensures that they'll be appropriately recognized. And furthermore, it helps to create a standard so that you do not have the situation where any type of activity is categorized as contributing to diversity. So the short answer is we don't mandate it as we do in the search process, but we do strongly encourage it, provide guidelines, and work with our campus executive personnel committee to ensure that faculty are appropriately recognized for those activities.
Thank you. And we just had a question that came in for Dr. Valentine regarding these search tools. Are these tools that are currently being tested, or are they completed and ready to roll out to other institutions? And could she explain a little bit more what the search tool entails?
Yes, thank you for that question. They are currently being tested. Just to remind you of our data-driven approaches, but I wouldn't want to roll out something without already evidence, and we use the NIH intramural program as a test bed for these tools. What the tool is really searching to identify potential candidates that a search committee can then reach out to and invite them to apply. So at the core of the search is a bibliometric search, actually, to see how who is out there that is doing cutting-edge research in this particular field that you may be searching in. And you can get a sense of that by the numbers of publications, the citations, and then you can use that information to then, through various social media tools, to figure out how that person is actually impacting their field. And then when you move on to more leadership positions, you can actually do further searches within that context to query about this person's or this group of people's leadership track record. And at the end of the day, what we provide our search committees is a full, broad picture of a group of potential candidates that fulfills the requirements that they're looking for, that we can say that this person or these group of people are very highly qualified for the position. We don't share, we're not in a position to share names. We're not in a position to keep databases. It's illegal to do that. But what we are in a position to do and share with the community is how to conduct these searches. And I think it's going to be important for individual institutions to show their commitment to this work by actually putting together the resources they needed to do the search. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Valentine. One of the questions that has come from a number of individuals in the audience, which I think is connected, is that even though there are these practices in place, a number of, Dr. Valentine had mentioned this again, myth of a limited applicant pool. And there's also cultural attitudes that faculty may have where there isn't a priority on diverse faculty hiring. So the question from the audience is, how do you create the culture change or dispel myths in the process of faculty searches and hiring at the institutional level? And that's for the all panelists.
Can I take that one? We've been thinking about that very carefully here. And I think we can all learn a lot from the NSF Advanced program. And my conclusions from that is that there has to be an institutional approach to this, whereby we engage the highest of leadership commitment to this work, and then come up with ways of operationalizing those strategies. So engaging university presidents to put their weight behind this needs, but then providing the tools for the department chairs to be able to do the best they can in using best practices for searches. So conducting workshops for them to be able to know how to search appropriately, developing and implementing, for example, a dashboard of equity, gender, race, ethnic metrics where they can compare their department to other institutions, creating centralized ways of data tracking, evaluation, and publicizing the data around demographics. I think one of the advanced institutions refers to this as creating this culture of data, this data-driven culture, bearing in mind that science is at the core of what we all do, and if we revert to our scientific core values of data to drive this, make this data available, publish it, and have institutional commitment to it, I think that's where we need to be going at this point, as opposed to strategies for fixing the individual, fixing the woman, fixing the underrepresented minority. I think we're past that. It's an institutional, integrated approach, data-driven, that is now required. And I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. I think we have time. Excuse me? Go ahead.
I just wanted to make a quick comment in terms of that question. I think there's a challenge in academia versus what we've seen in industry. I think industry has done a little bit better job of tackling this challenge, and I think perhaps if there was an opportunity to make that comparison and understand the greater impact that leadership has in terms of the mindset of the leader on what happens in the academic institution, that's another, I think, area we could potentially look into a little bit more, because there is this difference in how industry has been able to successfully do this where academia still struggles.
If you don't mind, I think that I agree with Dr. May and Dr. Valentine's observations. I just would add that there is also a role for associations such as the APLU, the Urban Serving Universities Project, and in the following way, that they can actually start collecting data too about members within the organization. Just to provide yet some external pressure, but also best practices. I think one of the big challenges is that in some cases we're sort of operating in a detached space, and we always are struggling to find the right data set. I think the large national associations can play a valuable role in providing that.
If I could just add one thing to push back a little bit about industry being successful. I actually don't see much evidence that they have been successful, really. They have a lot of resources. Everybody's running around doing unconscious bias training. But if you look at all of the companies, the tech companies, they publish their diversity metrics. I would argue that they are not as good at it, and they are looking to us. And I think in academia, we have the opportunity of actually stepping forward and taking the lead on this. I don't think industry has the answer. One thing that we may think about is how we partner with industry and how we partner with the other sectors to actually do a better job together. And this is what is really at the back of this idea of hubs of innovation that NIH has been talking about, and I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. We are flooded with questions, but we're also at the end of our time. So any of you who have been requesting various resources for the references, for some of the resources that have been mentioned by HERC and by NIH, we will be sending out an email afterwards with some of those references, and I will turn it over now to Nancy to close us out. And again, thank you all to the participants and our panelists for this wonderful conversation. I would just like to echo that. Thank you to all of our presenters for providing such an excellent webinar today, and thank you to all of our participant HERC members and beyond. It was great to have you with us. Thank you very much, everyone.
This concludes our webinar, everyone. Have a great day.